When cooling your CPU, like the 10900K, performance and aesthetics often go hand in hand because after all, you want it to look good and perform really well. So today, we're going to talk about Be Quiet's Shadow Rock 3, but as you can see here, it's a very special version because it's in white, making it a lot more aesthetically pleasing, but we're also going to see if it's going to handle an overclocked 10900K. So let's get started. Hey guys, Tiago with Classical Technology here. Remember to subscribe, hit that notification bell, smash that like button. Let me know what type of build you're doing. Maybe it's a white theme, maybe you want something a little bit different. Let me know down in the comments. So today, we're going to talk about this really cool CPU cooler that Be Quiet sent over to me for review. This is going to be the Shadow Rock 3. But it's the white version, therefore opening up many more possibilities for different aesthetics as well as different case designs. So we're going to break this up and talk about a few very important things that you should know about this CPU cooler. First is going to be sort of the unboxing experience, what you get, the installation process. Second is going to be with the aesthetics, of course, how it looks. As this is a special white version, I think that definitely needs its own little section. And then, of course, we're going to talk about a few other important things you should know, such as the size of it, how it fits in the case, compatibility, things of that nature. And lastly, of course, we're going to talk about the performance. I have an overclocked 10900K. I tested it not only with this cooler, and I also tested it with Be Quiet's Pure Loop 360mm AIO. That way we'll be able to see sort of how much of a performance difference there is from an air cooler like this to an AIO like that. So let's get started right with the packaging and unboxing experience. If you've bought an air cooler before, this one is no different. Everything comes very nicely packaged. You get a very nice set of instructions. If you're new to installing an air cooler, it may have a little bit of a learning curve at first, but it's really fairly simple to install. This you can install on Intel, AMD. They give you all of the different options. That way it doesn't matter which one you're running, you'll be able to install it. So that's great. You don't have to get like a specific version. So installing it on the Intel system, it's on an Apex Z490 motherboard. It's actually a very straightforward process. You just put the back plate on the back and you'll see it attaches to the front of the motherboard with some screws, and you put in these two little bridge systems, and then as you can see here on the cooler, there's a little space for a bar that goes here, and it basically just mounts like that. And in the box, much like the Dark Rock Pro 4, they do give you an extra long screwdriver because you'll actually need it, as you can see here, to be able to reach the screw when it's in your motherboard. You need something that's long like this, or else it's not going to fit through here. On this side, it's actually more open. You'll see when you mount it on your motherboard, there's a little bar that goes there, and you basically just screw it into those two little bridge pieces that I mentioned before. And of course, just remember to remove the sticker. Once I did forget to remove the little sticker on a separate water cooling block, and temperatures were really hot, so I took it apart and I found it, but one time I made that mistake. So remember to remove the sticker and to properly apply the thermal paste, and of course, you're going to get that in the box as well. And then after you have it connected to your motherboard, and it is easier to do this if the motherboard is actually out of the case. Sometimes when it's in the case, it can be a little bit tricky to get, the screw lined up exactly, but it is possible. I did it with the motherboard in the case. You can do it. It may take a little bit longer. And of course, then you just kind of pop the fan. You do get a Shadow Wings fan included as well. It's a 120mm fan, and you get these two little metal clips that sort of attach the fan to the cooler. It's very easy to do. You just put it on the fan, and then you just kind of pull it over, and it kind of holds it in place. And the only cable that you have to worry about with something like this, you just take the fan, go right to your CPU header. That way, whatever motherboard you're using, for example, on the Asus one, you can do like the Q fan, which you basically set your ramp and your curve for your CPU. Now, this fan is actually very quiet, as you would expect it to be, being from a company called Be Quiet. So I found that I could actually ramp it up and run it for a little bit higher RPM than I would with other fans, just to keep that cooling performance really going at max. And the audible volume of this fan is really fairly low. And the good thing about something like this, an air cooler, is that that's the only sort of moving part that you will have to worry about, in terms of noise and connections. So you basically just have that one fan connected. If this is something like the 360mm AIO, you have to mount 3 fans to it. The pump is going to have its own separate connection cable. Sometimes the pump is also going to have an RGB cable. You have to connect all 3 fans. You have to, make sure that the pump is set to 100%, or you can put that on RPM as well. So having something like this really simplifies the process, and later on we'll see if that simplicity is worth it in terms of the performance. And a few notes on the build quality: everything is built really well. Even that screwdriver that they include, the mounting mechanism is very intuitive. I really like that, and this feels very solid, very high quality. It's not too heavy. Something like the Dark Rock Pro 4 will be heavier just because it's a bigger cooler. So overall, build quality, the unboxing experience, everything that you get makes it for a pretty pleasant experience, which I think for the caliber of this and the quality, that's actually a very good value for your performance dollar. So now let's touch on the aesthetics of this. I personally, and this is going to be of course more subjective, I really like the look of it, and it's really awesome that they now have a white version of the cooler. A lot of people have been doing builds with different white themes in them. In fact, I even did one with their own Be Quiet, the 500DX case in white. It looks really good. It's a little bit of a difference from doing all black cases. This case back here is actually the Dark Base 700, which is going to be a little bit bigger than a 500, but it's in black. And still having a black case, I think aesthetically the white cooler really sort of sets it off. You can do a very nice sort of monochromatic theme. If you guys have seen even the new RTX GPUs, like the Founders Edition, it has a very monochromatic sort of element to it. And I think in a lot of cases, black works, gray, as well as white. It really lets you do a nice sort of neutral palette where colors aren't jumping everywhere. As you can see, you have some black here on the front. So basically when the cooler is mounted, you're going to see it like this. But from the sides and here, everything's going to be black. And now the included fans, of course, are a contrasting color. They're going to be black. But I'm sure if you wanted to, you could put a white fan on here. But I sort of like that contrast with the black fan and then the white cooler. I think in almost any case, even if all your other components are black, like I said, a lot of PC hardware is actually very monochromatic. Most motherboards have, a little bit of white in them sometimes, a lot of gray, and of course, majority of them have a lot of black as well. So this definitely fits in. And if you want to do a specifically more white build with other components, this is going to be your best choice. And I really think that's why Be Quiet produced this white version. That way, when somebody wants to do a theme build that's centered more around white, they can certainly do this, and it's going to be a fantastic addition aesthetically. So the noise levels are really not too bad. Some really high performance fans will scream way above 30. I consider to be actually very silent. You could almost run this fan at max speed if you're working in the room, and you won't really hear it too much. And at the same time, you're going to be getting the max performance from this fan. Now, let's talk about some other important things that you should know. Primarily, sort of the compatibility with different motherboards and RAM has certainly been an issue in the past for different air coolers. For example, even with Be Quiet's own Dark Rock Pro 4, which is a very big, beefy unit, along with Noctua's own air coolers, I've had to in the past buy very low profile RAM just to make sure that it fits in my system. I'm happy to report that the Shadow Rock Pro 3 is considerably better when it comes to that regard. It has an asymmetrical design with a top mounting system. That way you can more easily fit it in your case. For example, here I actually have 2 sticks of the Corsair Dominator Pro RGB, which has a massive and very tall heatsink. In fact, this wouldn't work with most other air coolers, but with this one, because of that asymmetrical design and the way that the cooler goes, it fit in absolutely perfectly. You can see that I had no fitment issues at all. So if it works with something like that Corsair Dominator RAM, you can bet that it's going to work with the majority of RAM sticks on the market, because these Corsair DIMMs are certainly very beefy and very tall. So I think it's a great testament that it pretty much fit right in there, and that certainly made the installation process considerably better. And then finally, let's talk about performance. Now, usually with Intel's 10900K, which is a 10-core, 20-thread CPU, it can certainly run very hot. And I think somebody with that processor, generally you may want to get a little bit bigger cooler like the Dark Rock Pro 4, or even consider doing an AIO like Be Quiet's own 360mm pure loop, just because that CPU, especially overclocked, does put out a considerable amount of heat. Now, the design of this CPU cooler is definitely very interesting. The heat pipes come in direct contact with the CPU surface. That way it means that that transfer of heat is going to occur more efficiently, faster, and especially for something that's smaller like this with one fan, it's going to better be able to deal with something like the 10900K. This CPU cooler is going to come in at under $60, so that's certainly going to be a great performance to build quality to value proposition. In general, I think it actually handled it really good. The 10900K, I tested it with the Asus motherboard's own overclocking mechanism in BIOS, basically removing all of the limits for the multi-core enhancement. meaning that it could go to work and pumping the CPU to the most that it can do. And that way I wanted to test it in sort of these like worst case type of scenarios just to see how it would handle it. And I think it did a pretty good job. On average, when doing something like Cinebench R20, let's say compared to the Darkrock Pro 4, which has dual fans and is a much bigger cooler, and it's also much more expensive, it got within 5 to 6 degrees Celsius of that temperature in Cinebench. The same story held true when I was doing Prime 95. The delta went up by a little bit, maybe like a 6 to 7 degree difference between the Darkrock Pro 4 as well as this cooler, but in general it definitely wasn't that massive of a difference. And with the 360 millimeter AIO, of course that handled the heat a lot better. Generally it'd be like an 8 to 9 degree difference from something like that to this cooler, but of course you're going to be spending considerably more for an AIO. You have to have more fans in there. It's certainly going to be a little bit noisier. This is going to be a little bit more silent, and not everybody's going to place this on a 10900K. I wanted to test the 10900K sort of in a worst case scenario type of overclock settings. Most people, I think, with this CPU may get something a little bit beefier, but this CPU cooler should have no trouble at stock handling the 10900K. Of course, if you start to push those overclocks, then I certainly recommend you get something at least like the Darkrock Pro 4 or an AIO that's at least, 280 to 360 millimeter. But surprisingly, even this smaller CPU cooler with one fan was at least able to handle the 10900K. It never crashed or anything like that. It remained stable. And compared to the beefier air cooler and AIO, it actually wasn't like a huge difference. And of course, it has a TDP of 190 compared to like 250 of the larger Darkrock Pro 4, and it's priced accordingly as it's a good deal cheaper than something like that. In general, I definitely think the performance was very respectable for the size and simplicity that this air cooler is, even on something on a very overclocked 10900K. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this video and the view of the Be Quiet Shadowrock Pro 3. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you have any questions. Remember to smash that like button, subscribe, hit the notifications, and I'll see you guys on the next video.